morning again comes from the Gospel of Matthew. It's a passage we've been looking at over the last 2 weeks, this being the third week, and it will be the last week. So Matthew chapter 5. This week I actually have brought a Bible, so I won't have to borrow one from the congregation. And we're going to read from verse 13. Timothy, if you can stick up the slides, I'll see if this is working. Just before I read. Yeah, brilliant. Let's go there. So let's read. Matthew 5 from verse 13. You are the salt of the earth, but if the salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? It's no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled underfoot. You are the light of the world. A town built on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on a stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. At the beginning of this talk, I was looking to see where Paul was. Oh, he's on the crest, that's fine, because I was going to say to him, actually, the timing for the sermon doesn't start until the sermon starts, okay? We don't include the reading in that. But early on, I want to hand something out to you, or I want you to hand it out to one another, so it's about to get passed round. Here it is. As it goes round, I'll start talking and hope that it's not too much of a distraction. Coming round in the bowl here is, for everybody, just a little packet of salt. Salt today, as you and I know, is a very common and very cheap commodity. It has not broken my bank buying 100 little packets of salt. And I won't be terribly upset if they never even get out of this building and end up in a bin before they ever get anywhere, because, as you know, in a sense, salt is cheap. In the ancient world, however, salt was a very valuable commodity. Because of the lack of alternatives, it was valuable because of its healing properties, its purifying properties, its flavoring properties, its preserving properties, and its fertilizing properties. I was tempted for a cryptic title to this sermon to say, you are the dung of the earth, but I decided that might not work. But salt was valuable for all of these reasons, and you and I today know that salt can be valuable for a whole number of reasons. If you do not know the value of a saline solution, you have never lived in my house. Sore eye, saline solution. Grazed knee, saline solution. Blocked up sinuses, saline solution. New piercing, saline solution. Broken leg, I'm taking this far too far. You and I know the value of salt. Again, I hope that from history we have all learned that people used to salt meat or salt fish in order to preserve it. And that is the type of thing that they would do if they were going on sea journeys. You and I know about the value of salt. Again, you and I know in the old Scottish conundrum about porridge. This is not the conundrum, do we need to eat it or not? Not that one. It's the conundrum, do we put salt on our porridge or not? But one way or another, you and I are very familiar with the idea that salt is valuable. And in the ancient world, it was valuable for its healing and for its purifying and for its preserving and for its savoring and for its fertilizing properties. And here Jesus says to his people, you heard him say, you are the salt of the earth. And of course, like anything, you can get too much of a good thing. You can have too much salt. Nevertheless, salt is presented in this passage as something that is good, that is something life-giving and something life-affirming. And Jesus says to his people, you are the salt of the earth. Of the earth. Our presence, therefore, is something that is meant to be life-giving and life-affirming in the communities where we are to be found. In preparing for this sermon, I looked up a really technical biblical commentary. And I don't know why, but I did. But in it, I found this absolutely stunning quote. And I'm not a great fan of long quotes in sermons. And this isn't terribly long, but it's really good. And the guy's name was Hans Dieter Betz. See, the name itself says academic, doesn't it? Hans Dieter Betz. And this is what he wrote. The salt of the earth means that the faithful disciples must get involved with this earth and its life. They are to regard themselves as a most important ingredient of this life. To say it with the metaphor, and this is a bit I love, they must be part of the dirt out of which the world is made. Love that line. You must be part of the dirt out of which the world is made. To be the salt of the earth is to be part of the dirt out of which the world is made, with the purpose of bringing something life-affirming, something good, something at times transformative. Of course, on the flip side, Jesus warns us here that salt that loses its flavor becomes worthless, and as it were, will be trampled into the very dirt of the earth for which salt is meant to flavor. Now, things get a little bit tricky at this point, and I did my fact-checking on this. Things get a little bit tricky because salt doesn't lose its flavor. Actually, it can't as a chemical. So what is Jesus meaning here when he says this? Well, there are various options. One option is that he's being ironic. That is, he talks about salt losing its flavor because salt cannot lose its flavor, in order to show how absurd it is that Christian people would stop being an influence. This is and pigs will fly moment. Salt would lose its flavor and pigs will fly. God's people will no longer flavor positively where they live, and pigs will fly. He's trying to show how absurd it is that we would cease to be a good influence. Other people, however, go, no, that's not the story. Instead, Jesus is talking here about salt-like substances that are filled with impurities that can lose their flavor, and therefore that is what he is talking about. We shouldn't be like them. We should be real salt. You have no idea how many words have been written in this. Others, however, come up with a different option, and the other option is the translation for what we translate as lose its flavor can be translated as become foolish or become dull. And I quite like that, because it's not really saying it loses its flavor, but that it ceases to function well in the way that it should. I also like this idea because you and I have got to be honest. Many Christians have done some pretty foolish things that haven't really helped us to make a difference in the world. And at times we can be pretty dull. However, no matter what way you want to look at this, it all lands in the same place. And it lands in the same place, which basically says the idea that salt would lose its flavor, the idea that Christians would stop being a positive influence where they are, is something absurd. When salt ceases to function as salt, it becomes worthless in its context. And likewise, when we cease to function as salt of the earth in the world, that we lose the value that we can bring into the world. And as such, says Jesus, it is good for nothing except to be trampled underfoot. In the first 3 weeks of this year, we have been looking at the three images in this passage in Matthew's Gospel. We've been looking at these three images, and then I've been interpreting them in a particular way. I've been interpreting them in terms of what do they tell us about the nature of the church. And I've also been interpreting them through the lens of our mission statement. And our mission statement is about changing lives and changing communities. And in the first week, I went for the often ignored third image in this passage, which is the city on the hill. And I spoke about the fact that we are a city on a hill, and I used the Greek word polis, which seemed to be very popular and well remembered by some people, that speaks about us being a community and talks about our life together. In our life together, we are people who should be being changed and hopefully at times changing others. You're a city set on a hill. We are a community together. And then last week, I took up the image of the light of the world, and I used it and explored it in the sense that the light of the world speaks about our common mission together. And what I mean by that, it speaks about the mission that we as a congregation decide that we might identify, instigate, facilitate, and support the things that we do together to make a difference in the world and in the community. And so we talk about our kids club. We talk about our food bank. They are our things into which we as a congregation are pouring maybe resources and money and volunteers and staff. And at that point, I also said that we had to think about our local geographic community as one of the communities that we want to make a difference in. And I put up this image. And it's great because people have asked me so many questions about this. And it's really encouraging that anyone remembers anything beyond 12:05 sometimes. And people ask me questions such as, why didn't I go further back up there, up the hill? Or why did I kind of lean in one direction down the road instead of up the road? So people ask me, and this was just meant to signify roughly 500 houses round about the church, and I'm really glad people asked these questions. In some senses, this was very random. It was meant to be illustrative and not definitive. It was also meant to be, in my mind, the greatest population density within a few-minute walk, and it wasn't meant to exclude anybody. So if your house didn't appear in this, I'm really sorry. But here was the point that I'll come back to. Whether it's 5 houses, 50 houses, 500 or 5,000, we can draw the circle as big as we want. We will not be their community church, nor will they see us as their church, unless we have sustained presence and regular, meaningful contact. We are seeking to be the light of the world. But it was a good question, and I'm also glad that people asked it and kind of said, why that circle? Because, of course, many of us, some of us do, but many of us don't live within that geographic area round about the church. And I want you to hear me say this. That is really good. For we are a gathered church. That is, we are a church that does seek and does aim to gather from as wide an area as people want to come. We do have a geographic centre and we do have a focus, but we are not limited to that. We are not a parish church in the sense that we are limited to a parish. We're a gathered church that draws other than in the words of Wesley, who said, "The world is my parish." And so, indeed, although we have a focus and a geographic focus, we also want to say, whoever will really can come, wherever they are from. However, it's at this point I think that the salt image really helps us, because it speaks to us, or it can speak to us, about our scattered lives. Because the fact is that as people we scatter. We gather, to be sure, but we also scatter from this place. We scatter to other communities, to our family, to our friends, to our interest groups, to our study places, to our workplaces, and we come into contact with a wide variety of communities through doing that. We scatter, be it to Giffnock, Hamilton, Cambuslang, Stuart, or indeed wherever. And there, we also should be making a difference as the scattered church, as the salt of the earth. When I was a minister at Kirkintilloch Baptist Church, I lived in Kirkintilloch. Our house was there. Our kids went to Kirky High School. We shopped in Kirkintilloch. I went to the gym in Kirkintilloch. You're like that, you're lying. No, it was a while ago. I'm not lying. The office was in Kirkintilloch, and hey, the name was on the church, Kirkintilloch Baptist Church. And so when I came to think about mission, I thought mainly about Kirkintilloch, although with a bit of generosity included Lindsay. We never got as far as Christ, and they were doing their own thing over in the corner, okay? So we didn't get that far. I really thought Kirkintilloch, and so we would talk about mission in Kirkintilloch, our community of Kirkintilloch. And one day, however, I met one of the elders in the church, and he was talking about his job, and it suddenly struck me for the first time, that he got up in the morning, although he lived in Kirkintilloch, and a huge amount of his life was spent out of this area that I kept on thinking was the community. He scattered. And he lived and he served among a whole range of communities. And that raised for me the question, how indeed as a church do we help people not simply gather in our witness, but scatter in our witness, as it were, as the salt of the earth. It's part of our scattering nature as we go and now contact a whole variety of communities. Scattering into a whole variety of communities is what makes us interesting and diverse. And it can also be a great amount of fun, but it can also be deeply challenging. And it can be challenging because the dirt of what this world is made is complex. It can be hard work scattering because of who we are, psychologically and physically. It can be complex scattering because of where we work. It can be complex scattering because of who we meet and mix with. It can be complex scattering because of health and finances. It can be complex scattering because of the unwelcome, unexpected things that will sometimes come our way that can leave us drained and disheartened. Consequently, our gathering should be a place that helps support, sustain, and reinforce us and resources for when we scatter. Our gathering should be a place to refresh, reset, and maybe at times actually relax. At times, it's okay to enjoy being together. The famous singer Patsy Cline sang in her song, Dear God, these words: I go to church on a Sunday. The vows I make, I break them on Monday. The rest of the week, I do as I please, and come Sunday morning, I pray on my knees, Dear God, I know I am not worthy, but I need you, so please won't you hurry and help me turn back from the path I have trod. You'll never be sorry, dear God. I don't know what you make of these lyrics, but there's a good inclination in them. Indeed, in many church traditions, very early on in the service, there is a prayer of confession. And very early on in the service, we have a prayer of confession, because the Bible says, if we claim to be without sin, we deceive ourselves and the truth is not in us. If we confess our sins, he is faithful and just and will forgive us our sins and will purify us from all unrighteousness. Part of the gathering is about refocusing and resetting and being supported and sustained for our scattering. Although whenever I would do that regularly, I would say to people, we are going to issue prayers of confession, not because we are worms, but because we are human and life is complex. And we come and we seek to be restored, not simply because we are people who might at times sin and do wrong, but we need reset and restored because at times life can be hard. And therefore, when we gather, we need to learn to mourn with those who mourn and rejoice with those who rejoice, so that we can find the strength and the support that we need to go once more and scattering. Or to borrow from the preacher Ottismos III, sometimes we need to learn to sing the blues moan before we will ever reach the gospel shout. And so when we gather and we pray and we learn and we listen and we sing, we are coming to reset ourselves so that once more we can scatter. Because Jesus says to us, you are the salt of the earth.